I would like to thank you to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer on the World Puja Network, and I would like to thank the World Puja Network for giving us this time to share an update on the Orion Project.org, and I'm joined today with our science advisor, Dr. Ted Loder, who's Professor Emeritus from the University of New Hampshire, to talk about the transformation of risk in the world and how to transform our civilization to one that is sustainable and addresses the huge problems we are facing. Thank you, Ted, for joining us.
Well, good afternoon, Steve. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah, so one of the things I wanted to sort of introduce this idea of where we got the concept for this show is about 10 months ago I was invited to join a gentleman who's head of a Geneva-based group of international leaders that looks at the big risks facing our civilization, everything from the collapsing electric power grids to global warming to geopolitical unrest, etc. And it was interesting because in this conversation, this gentleman who has worked closely with President Bush and a lot of other world leaders, when I began to discuss the kinds of solutions to the energy and environmental problems that the Orion Project.org, and everyone can go there and see what we're doing at that site, he said, well, you know, the problem is what you're suggesting is too good of a solution. And it was sort of an astonishing statement. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, people don't want really those sort of major solutions. They want to just sort of incrementally change things. And at that point, a woman who had worked most of her life at the State Department piped up and said, you know, for God's sakes, it's too late for incremental changes. And she's a very good friend of this gentleman and kind of jumped all over him. And what was interesting, though, I mean, we're sitting at the University Club, you know, where Rumsfeld and a lot of the elites of Washington go for dinner and lunch and what have you. It's just down the street from the White House. And about half the room heard her say that. And what I thought to myself was, you know, here we are, steps from the White House, and we have one of these, you know, real power brokers in the world that I'm meeting with. And, you know, he's talking about the fact that while they're studying all the problems the world is facing, that there'd be a lot of resistance to embrace the solution. And that gives you an insight into this. And then he said to me, he says, well, I think what you're suggesting is wonderful. However, you have to understand all leaders, even the ones who consider themselves progressive, once they get into power, they become conservative, meaning they don't want change because they don't want to have to manage the change, and it's easier to just let things go on like they are. It's easier not to rock the boat. And he said this is one of the real problems with big fundamental change. Now,
which is ironic, if I may butt in for Steve for a second.
Yes.
Change is the byword of our present election.
Yes, I know. It is. At the same time, it often becomes just words. I mean, when people get into power, they sort of back off of that. Now, we'll see what happens with this election. But the bottom line is that, you know, he made this point, which is a very good one, actually, and that is the captains of industry and finance and the big political leaders and even the big military leaders I've met with who are admirals and generals generally do not want to alter the status quo. The problem is, and this is where you have to step back, you know, from the burning forest that's collapsing in front of us and look at the whole huge biosphere of Earth, is that we're a civilization that's hurtling towards oblivion because we're completely non-sustainable and have been for over 100 years because of the basic way that we're living on the planet. And I think that unless you address those things, you're really just fiddling while Rome burns. And I think this is the real issue. And by the way, this gentleman who did agree with me on that, and he has since become a sort of intermediary between our group and this very powerful Geneva-based think tank and coordinating committee that deals with international risk and all of that. And I wrote a paper which is on the OrionProject.org. If you go to www.theorionproject.org, you will see a paper there called The Transformation of Risk. So I know that this is one of the real issues that are facing us, and unfortunately, most of the time, you've seen this in academia as well, is that people really are very reluctant to embrace things that are radical departures from the status quo.
Yes, that certainly is the case, and I think this topic of this whole issue is so germane to the present political set of discussions that's going on right now, et cetera, because even last night at the presidential debate, and we'll get into this a little later, there was a discussion and some question regarding energy issues in the world and the concept, for example, of a Manhattan-style project to bring forth breakthrough technologies was discussed and addressed by the candidates. I mean, this is something, as an example, that Dr. Tom Bearden was talking about 8 years ago or 7 years ago, and has been talked about by a number of people in the energy field that we've needed that, but it hasn't made mainstream. Last night, it was on the debate.
Yes, I find it interesting. It was 8 years ago this month that we conducted these, Dr. Loder organized a briefing for the Senate Environment Committee, and we brought a number of these new energy leaders there to brief staff members, and it's now been 8 years since we recommended that at least some small portion of the money from the Department of Energy and the EPA and other entities go into fundamental basic science research in this forbidden area that deals with advanced electromagnetic systems, the so-called quantum vacuum or zero-point energy field, and related technologies. And, of course, it hasn't happened, but because it's an area that it isn't that it lacks scientific evidence that it exists. It's because the powers that be never want to step into this big of a change, and this is why the Orion Project.org exists. We're here coordinating as a non-governmental organization, an NGO, scientists and researchers, promising inventors, but also we're a bridge group to policymakers and politicians and others, and to the public, to educate them about the fact that there needs to be a very bold look. You know, Barack Obama suggested $15 billion a year over a 10-year period, which would be $150 billion of U.S. taxpayer money. However, there was no mention of these types of technologies. So part of it is that our policymakers need to be fundamentally educated on the fact that there are ways of deriving energy besides biofuels and solar and wind. And I think that this is simply not appreciated, and often they are surrounded by people who are so addicted to the conventional wisdom, so stuck in the glass box in the echo chamber of Washington and what have you, that they really don't look into these things. And I think that's another area where the public needs to begin to write to them and say, you need to look into this. Go to the orionproject.org and take a look at this. And there's some very good scientific papers there that establish the science behind this. And now there needs to be at least a small amount of resources and supporting put there. But I think in the meanwhile, we need to say, hey, the public needs to step up to the plate here. We're very excited to announce that in the last week, there have been two benefactors who have surfaced who have contributed $120,000 to the orionproject.org. And so we're moving closer to our goal of being able to fund the kind of research we want to do.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Another comment about this is that, and I think what I learned from our experience with the Senate Environmental Public Works Committee was that sometimes you can bring the message too early and it's not listened to, and sometimes too late. Timing is really critical, because 8 years ago when we talked about the need for all these things, the need for this basic research, and we would have had time to sort of do some of it in a sort of a methodical, scientific way, it was ignored, basically. And what happened was, even though the head of the committee, Senator Bob Smith, had requested that the National Academy look into this and do some of their research, National Academy of Sciences, it turned out that somewhere along the line that was totally derailed from somebody above him or the people setting it up, and it was just totally taken off the radar screen. So in that case, people thought they could just stop research into this area without anybody noticing. And then lo and behold, that's what happened, in spite of some outcries and people writing letters, but it fell on deaf ears. Today, the ears are listening, at least at a certain level, and the public continually hammering, if you will, on their public leaders to look into this thing is starting to have, I think, some initial awareness on our public leaders.
Well, yeah, that's right. And I think that, when we take a look at this and begin to analyze, usually there's the old saying, if the people will lead, the leaders will follow. And in that sense, the Orion Project.org, just like the Disclosure Project.org, have been leadership entities that have caused a big shift in perception on issues, and that's why we need the public to help us spread the word through networking and also to contribute generously as they can to the OrionProject.org. I mean, there are some people who are making very big contributions, and we're now calling on everyone who listens to the World Puja Network to get online and contribute generously to this nonprofit effort so that we can educate the public about the fact that, and our leaders, that we don't need to put all of our eggs in the baskets that are being spoken of today in terms of solutions, that there are some solutions out there that have been very well developed within classified projects. Anyone who doubts it can read the book, The Race to Zero Point, and they will find that all the way back since the 40s and 50s, if not earlier, there was some very elegant research going on that resulted in breakthroughs that became very classified in, I believe it was October of 1954, so 54 years ago this month, that most of this went, quote, black. And
well, certainly the research on at that time on anti-gravity, counter-gravity technology all went dark around that time period.
Oh, yeah, we have people in the Department of Defense today who are with the largest scientific research lab that is assigned to the Department of Defense, who's a very senior scientist there, who has confirmed to us that, in fact, it was 1954, that all of those sort of initiatives that had begun to be discussed, pretty open source, actually, if you go back into the late 40s and early 50s, and that it was because there had been substantial breakthroughs, and they decided that they did not want the public to know this information because basically, even then, because of the power of the centralized petrodollar system and the energy grid, the utility systems, the oil and gas and coal sectors, that they did not want to, quote, rock the boat. Well, whether or not that made sense in 1954, I wasn't alive then. But I can say in 2008, it's galactically brain dead to still be hurtling forward with the same policy of secrecy and suppression on this issue when we're watching the global geoeconomic system literally melt down right before our eyes, and the biosphere is melting down, and people are flailing their arms looking for energy solutions and economic solutions, and none of the ones that are being discussed in the town hall meetings and in the big mainstream media are really going to be enough soon enough. They're going to be too little, too late.
Oh, and absolutely. It's so discouraging to hear actually both candidates speak about the standard solar, wind, a little more efficiency, and maybe nuclear power plants, and not even address the possibility that there may be breakthrough technologies out there with a little bit of effort could really change the present paradigm.
Well, it's not just the political people. It's also policy journals, scientific entities, scientific leaders around the world. None of them are addressing the issue at anything near. I mean, everyone's gotten very good at and quite adept at describing the problem. But that's like describing the water when someone's drowning. I mean, it's a certain point, it's helpful only at the initial assessment. At this point, we need to have people who begin to elucidate the real solutions. And that's what the OrionProject.org is suggesting, that there are real solutions there that can be looked at and developed that would, in a very short amount of time, because it's not as if you're starting from scratch. You're starting with a body of information, albeit it's been very, very, in a sense, esoteric and suppressed, but it does exist dating back for nearly 100 years, that there are ways to get large amounts of usable electric power from the space around us, and that this is not a myth. This can be proven, and it's been done. The problem is that you've got to put a group of people together to bring out some of these systems, and that's what we're trying to do. I mean, we're doing it on two tracks. One is that we're trying to reach out to inventors and scientists and engineers who are on their own and with their own funds have been trying to experiment in this area and see who has some really successful early prototypes that may be worth some grants from the Orion Project, and we are making some of those grants. There's a group actually in a foreign country that has some very promising breakthroughs, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. But I think that ultimately we're going to have our own operation to take whatever it is that any sort of homegrown inventor group that is an engineering group has, to really make it into something strong enough and it's proven scientifically to be reproducible and robust to get out to the public. And that's going to take frankly, some serious funding. I don't think it can be done for a few $100,000. I think we're going to need, as you see on our website, we have a budget of about $3.1 million so that we can establish this. Now, to give you an idea of how small a budget that is, that's only about half of what my rural county in Virginia raised to build a new stray dog and cat shelter. So, you know, at a certain point, we're just having to say, look, people need to learn about this, and if lots of people, I mean, if 10,000 people listening to the World Puja Network right now, you know, contributed whatever they could to this effort, whether it's $1,000 or $10, we'd have those resources so we could pull these scientists together that we have identified. And by the way, it's not just scientists that theoretically can work on this. Some of them have actually built systems that under classified contracts who are prepared to break from their current contracting status with the government and work with us, but they can't do it without a salary. They have families. They can't do it without a laboratory that would cost about $500,000 to outfit properly and a building. I mean, these are all things that are, you know, kind of brick and mortar things that have to be done, and we're calling on the people, the public, to realize the urgency of the risks facing our planet and to put these modest resources available to our group so that we can collect together the best minds in the world who understand this area of research and engineering.
Yes, it's critical that we do this in order to bring together the scientists who have these ideas and some prototype concepts with engineers who can visualize, design, and build things, coupled with machinists or mechanics, machinist people who can actually build things in the real world, and electrical engineers. It takes a multiple of skills to create many of these devices that we're speaking of. It's not something, it's the very rare, quote, inventor in the garage who has actually all these skills that are very often very highly technical to bring to bear on developing such technologies.
Well, and what we've found as we've gone around the world over the last decade or so meeting with such people is that many of them will have part of the answer but not all of it. And this is where the synergy comes in, where if we could have a small research campus where we could collect, 10 to 20 of the best minds as well as some consultants who would come in, then you could sort of close the gaps where some of the folks have hit a wall where they couldn't take it any further. And I think this kind of synergy and interdisciplinary approach is urgently needed. I know Dr. Bearden's been calling for it for years. We're now saying we have to do that. And we're not talking about, $150 billion, which is what some of the candidates are talking about. We're talking about a very modest initial $3 million from the public. And look, I mean, all of us are taxpayers, and our tax dollars are going into every kind of stupid thing at the Department of Energy and everywhere else. We have put more money into studying squids in the Pacific. than we have into this area, quite frankly, if you look at the budgets of the United States government and all the pork barrel nonsense. And that's coming out of our tax dollars. But I think that what we have to understand is that this is another way, and since it's a tax-deductible contribution, it sort of saves you some on your taxes and puts the money where it'll do some good instead of the sort of wasted money that's been poured into billions and hundreds of billions of dollars over the years into the Department of Energy on hot fusion and all kinds of other things that are simply not going to be feasible.
It's interesting that the present economic crisis of the world, at least some of the issues that brought this to bear, deal with energy and the balance of payments and the fact that we buy so much of our foreign energy supplies in terms of oil, gas, from foreign countries. And this issue is far more widely ranging than just heating your house or running your car.
Well, and I think that's the other thing is that if we take another big step back, and this gets into this whole concept of the transformation of the current risks that our society are facing, the house of cards that are collapsing right now are collapsing because we have a society that is built on basically a mirage. It's based on this sort of fraudulent financial system and all the sort of games that are played on Wall Street and in the international banking world, and whether it's, mortgage plays and CDOs and every other kind of crazy thing. And yet we haven't been building a society that's really based on a growing fundamental economy. And what I mean by that, the fundamentals of a strong economy are a sustainable economy that would lift all the people of the world out of poverty. You have 80% of the world in poverty. You have half of the planet living on only a few dollars a day. I believe there's 2 billion people on the planet living on less than $1 a day. And so there's plenty of growth that can happen. But the problem is it can't happen. It's being strangled by the zero-sum game of the type of energy and therefore financial system we have. Because if everyone started using oil and gas and coal, guess what? It would be $1,000 a barrel instead of $100. I think that this is one of the real fundamental structural problems that have got to be looked at, and then the realization dawns that this area of science where you could have a generator sitting in any village in Africa or Asia or India or anywhere else that would be running the energy needs of that community, that you would have this clean source of energy that would lift all people up out of poverty, would allow for 100% recycling of materials because the energy to do so would be free. You would not be burning carbon-based materials to get your energy, so you would stop global warming and the biosphere degradement, and you would grow the world economy fivefold, tenfold from where it is today. You cannot do that with the current system. Both the economic system and the energy system that is sort of locked hand in hand with it are fundamentally flawed. And this is something which has been going on now since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. And what I'm saying is that we have to take a long view here and see that in order to transform this current situation so that we don't go to a just complete meltdown geopolitically and economically and environmentally, we're going to have to introduce some fundamental new sciences and technologies and ways of living on the planet that would replace the current energy system with a decentralized system that would lift the whole world up, not only economically, but environmentally, and I think ultimately spiritually, because this would then be a very hopeful thing. People would, instead of just talking about hope, we would create the basis for being hopeful, because people could say, gee, there's a way out of this morass that we find ourselves in. And this is why I think the message of the Orion Project.org is a very hopeful message. It's one that says, look, we have the sciences and technologies and the knowledge to create this positive development, and that it's time for us to do that.
Well, we go back to the transformation of risk, which is our topic here of discussion. And the real risk, is not doing this. The real risk is staying on the present course.
Right, and this is exactly what I had said to, this power broker that I met with at the university club here in Washington, and I'm actually in Washington right now at my place. I can see the Washington Monument and the White House from my place here in Washington, and I'm
Wonderful.
thinking, how ironic. And as I look over the city, I think, well, you've got all these folks talking about all these problems, and they're all running around like chickens with their heads cut off, and no one is looking at the fundamental structural basis for the problem, and therefore what the essential solution is. And the solution is actually sitting right there, hidden away at Lockheed Skunk Works, or in Northrop, or in classified areas within the Department of Energy. One of the chairman of the committee there in the Congress, who I know, has a friend who called us in the last few months and said that this person had worked for the Department of Energy, and when they were down at the Oak Ridge facility, there was an adjacent underground complex where there were literally hundreds of these free energy type generators and other things that had been confiscated and were being kept secret. And a lot of people find that astonishing, and you wouldn't believe it, except I've heard this from so many people who are highly credible. And yet, it's like the left hand doesn't even know the right hand exists. And we're going to have to see that in order for us to make a change, we're going to have to begin to discuss these issues and find people with the courage to make this change happen. And that is really what is needed. It needs knowledge and education, but also the courage to act and embrace an entirely new civilization. And I agree, the whole issue is that not doing anything about this is the riskiest thing at all. At one point, I guess you could have argued that, they didn't know about global warming. The industrialized world felt it was okay. Why rock the boat with introducing something like this that would affect so many essential parts of our market economy? I don't say free market economy because it isn't free. It never has been. But the fact of the matter is, at this point, people are waking up to the fact that if we don't do something and do something really essentially new, our civilization is headed for a train wreck like we have never seen. And I think that this is why, in a sense, what we're doing now is very timely because as you had mentioned, Ted, the environment now is very receptive and ripe to out-of-the-box thinking and new ideas about these issues. And I think that's what we have to bring to our leaders, but also to the public. And I hope everyone listening at the World Puja Network will send a link to this show to everyone they know so that they have some idea of understanding what the problems are, but also that there's a group really searching for some out-of-the-box creative solutions, and that we're very confident that it can be achieved, that we can create a new civilization that's sustainable. And if you look at our current civilization, it simply is not sustainable. It is a civilization that has been running on, as it were, old paradigms, dealing with coal and oil and a petrodollar system and all of these sort of things, much longer than it should have. That, when Tesla and others began to experiment with this, and T. Townsend Brown discovered the anti-gravity effect, and the Kolosky-Frost experiment, which we've talked about before in Germany in 1920s, late 1920s, we're able to create this sort of levitation and anti-gravity effect around an object. But these are all things that, if they had not been actively suppressed by those in power, we would not be facing this crisis today. So that, we can't go back in a time machine and change that. But what we can do is say, let's learn about those things. Let's learn from the mistakes of the last 100 years and now let's fix the problem for our children and our children's children and for the
part
future.
of fixing that problem in terms of our audience of the World Puja Network is to contact, write, or get in touch with their various leaders and make them aware, as we mentioned earlier, aware that there are some alternatives out there. And one of the problems with that our typical leaders find is they will talk to the more standard keep things as they are scientists who will say that we just have to they have their own agenda. They have to burn coal cleaner or put up more solar power plants or solar cell systems or whatever. And so many of our politicians and our, quote, leaders in this country are being advised and directed by people who have their own agenda and their own set of issues and don't know of and wish to, I hate to use the term suppress, but that's essentially what happens, some of these technologies for their own agenda. And so once again, it comes back to that education issue of educating and insisting on educating some of the people that there are some alternatives out here and that we need to look at them. And as Dr. Greer mentioned, just starting that process is not a major financial input, but it does require money. You can't do this sort of research and technology development, frankly, in a garage on a shoestring. The technologies are just such that they require special materials, special electronics, special machining, which all costs money in today's environment.
Well, and the other thing that's very important is that everyone listening knows someone who is concerned about the environment or the energy issue who could be major benefactors for the OrionProject.org. A fellow medical doctor, a friend of mine, has someone that he knows who has now pledged an additional $100,000 and maybe more to help us. So it's really about networking this to people and saying, look, these guys have a wonderful group of scientists that they have identified. This is worth making some kind of contribution. And so the networking people can do who are listening to the World Puja Network, and I'm very grateful for the World Puja Network giving us the time to do this, can be a big assistance because there are a lot of folks out there who are concerned about these issues who need to learn about them. And once they do, if they go to the OrionProject.org, and that's the website, www.theorionproject.org, then you will see that there are a lot of links to scientific papers that deal with this and will establish that this is a legitimate area of science and research that ought to be supported. And the other problem, I think, is that a lot of the public don't understand how, I use the word hidebound, many scientists are. And I use this, I'll give an example that it's not in the energy area just so people will get a sense of this. Some years ago, there was a medical doctor at the University of Virginia where we live and where our project is headquartered, who had discovered that there was a bacteria that caused many of the worst bleeding ulcers in the stomach. Now, because this ran into the face of the conventional wisdom of the pathology and of that particular disease, and because it sort of said that it wasn't because of too much acid in the stomach, there was actually a pathogenic bacteria that a very inexpensive, not over-the-counter, but generic antibiotic for a couple weeks would fix. He was literally ridiculed, and he had to go to Australia to continue his research, even though he had proven that this bacteria was what was causing many of these worst bleeding ulcers. Now it's considered malpractice not to check for that and then treat it if that bacteria is present in the stomach. Now, but at the time, there was such a cacophony of howls from the scientific establishment and the pharmaceutical companies and the medical establishment and the academic establishment, he literally fled the country so he could continue his research. And this is about something as banal as ulcers in the stomach. Now, you can imagine the reaction amongst the hidebound physicists and scientists and others who advised Barack Obama and McCain and the Senate committees and what have you, and in academia, people who've worked with Dr. Loder, who, when they hear these really strong departures from the conventional wisdom of science and electromagnetism and physics, they just go apoplectic. And so this is another problem: is that scientists are humans first and scientists second, and they often become rather egotistical and attached to the knowledge they know, and become violently opposed to something that is new and is outside of what they consider their understanding of something. So I call it scientific fundamentalism, just like there's sort of religious orthodoxy and fundamentalism. And you find this a great deal among scientists. And most lay people who are not in the sciences, don't understand that this happens all the time. And there's a long and rich and rather disastrous history, frankly, of the scientific community opposing something that is not in their current understanding.
That's so true. In fact, if you look at the history of many of our major inventions that have come across in the last 100 years or so, we see that although some inventions, and a number of them have come from academic, scientific communities, many of them have come from individual inventors or people who've been sort of working outside of the system, who are not funded on NSF or government grants to do a certain thing that somebody else thought was important, but they sort of did their own thing, off in a corner or in their own lab or whatever. And sort of the serendipity breakthroughs that have occurred when people think outside the box instead of within a very restricted, constricted set of guidelines. And pretty much the history of science in many ways.
Well, it is. I mean, beginning with Galileo and the Vatican and the persecution of him. So I think, what you look at is that it's a very lonely and difficult road to be working in an area that one's peers in the scientific community or engineering community would scoff at. And I think this is another reason why the public need to support these sort of inventors and scientists through the OrionProject.org, so that they know that there are people there saying, we'll stand with you and support you in your experiments and in your research, because this is such a promising area that could hold the real key to new energy solutions. And we're not going to scoff at it, because we've read that this has been done in the past and is possible. And the public are not trying to protect their position at MIT in a certain area of science where, they think they know everything, and they really don't know much, frankly. And I think that this is one of the real problems, is that people who get to that level of science and technology think they know everything. And this is why, as you said, Ted, many of the big breakthroughs in history have come from people from, quote, outside the system. And if you do a study of science and the breakthroughs, the big leaps forward, they've all come from people who have been operating, for the most part, outside the system. And it's a bit ironic, but that is the truth. And I think that this has been like this since the dawn of the scientific era.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and so here we are at sort of the edge of the abyss in terms of financial and energy on this planet. And, time is very short and sort of making this transformation.
Well, I think this is the other thing I wanted to talk about. We're facing enormous risks, much greater risks if we don't do anything than if we act. And this is why I'm making an urgent appeal on this date in October of 2008 for the people listening to the World Puja Network to go to the OrionProject.org and to send the link of this show to all of their friends and family and networks, and ask them to contribute so that we can quickly move forward with a number of these projects that are showing promise. For example, we have just heard that we are only one of two people who are bidding on the Stan Meyer water-to-fuel system that we've talked about on past shows. Unfortunately, the other group bidding has already put the bidding up to $75,000 for that, and we're going to have to meet or exceed that, plus put the team together to actually get the systems operating again and study them and figure out how they were working. I'm referring now to and this is on our website, the Stan Meyer water systems that electrolyzed water into hydrogen and oxygen, and was at one point running a car and had run other systems. Well, Dr. Loder went and saw this material that's been in storage since Stan Meyer's death in 1996, and he went there in January of this year in 2008, and now we're at this point, but it's a very, very big financial commitment. And it isn't just the price of the acquisition. It has to then be secured, transported. A facility has to be acquired to store it and study it. Staff has to be hired to research all of that. And it's going to be at least $500,000 conservatively to do anything with it. We don't have those funds, so we need people to go to the orionproject.org and contribute for that. On top of that, there are a group of engineers in another country who are working on, we've been working very intensely with them over the last 3 months or so. Learned them about 6 months ago.
That's correct,
who state that they have developed a solid state over unity free energy generator and are trying to complete in the next month or so a 20 kilowatt system. This would be enough to run any home or business in America of modest size. I mean, 20 kilowatts is a lot of power, and it'd be the size of a large filing cabinet or something to that effect. Now, these folks say that some years ago they had developed a 10 kilowatt iteration of this, and that General Motors tried to get it off their hands for $5 million. And of course, I think they realized that it was going to end up in the black pit of Calcutta, because I have people who've been on the inside of the classified projects at General Motors that where these sort of breakthroughs have simply been put on a black shelf, like the person who works with this congressman told me about the storage facility at Oak Ridge. So, these things have been hidden away for years, and that is not an urban myth or a conspiracy. It's just the way business is done. So we're trying to rescue this technology. But if we do, it's going to take an enormous amount of resources, because we're talking about very heavy research into the electronics. To reproduce the technology, you're talking about custom, one-off circuit boards and components that have to be handmade. Until you get to mass manufacturing, these sort of things literally cost tens of thousands and even hundreds of thousands of dollars to do. So we're going to need support from the public on this as well. But if they can complete this as planned, they have agreed to let the Orion Project have this initial prototype, and then we would put a team together to see if we can reproduce the effect. And this would be going on in the fairly near future if they succeed. We're hoping they do. They've shown good promise in the past of having done these things, and it would be an enormous breakthrough. But we need everyone to understand that this is going to require a lot of support from the public. There's no one person on our team who can step up and provide all the funding that would be needed for that. A very, very important project. We'll certainly be announcing on the World Puja network if they are successful. We're hoping and praying they are very soon, and indications are from a member of our team, Bill Costantino, who was up there visiting them in the past week, that they have some very, very promising and professional breakthroughs in the kind of electronics that they're doing. And again, this would be a system that doesn't have it's not like a old-fashioned rotary generator. This is a solid-state system that apparently puts out about 18 net kilowatts of power while the startup battery system stays completely charged. If true, this is the definitive breakthrough we're looking for. And we're hoping that we get news on that. But when we do, we're going to need everyone who hears the World Puja Network to step up to the plate very quickly and help us secure that technology and put the team together to study it and reproduce it and scientifically prove it and then get it announced to the public.
Yeah, a comment about that is that, putting the, quote, team together to study it is not a trivial exercise, because here we have some esoteric electronics, resonance thing, fancy transformers, and other technologies that the average electrical engineer has no clue about, in spite of the fact that the ideas, or the bits and pieces, are sort of standard ideas, or the bits and pieces, if you will. The electronic pieces are things that already exist, already built, but it's the way they're put together. It's the special circuit boards that are put together. And
really, those are all custom. Those are having
all custom.
Yep.
As Dr. Greer has said, and it takes multiple people with, again, different skills to be able to put all that together and to reproduce it.
Well, and not only that, but let's step back for a minute, and the people listening must be at this point thinking, Christ, if they get this thing operating, what are the security parameters you'd have to put around this project? I mean, and I don't want to get into that too far, but let me just tell you, you'd be carrying around the equivalent of a $300 trillion invention in the sense of its economic impact, because it would completely replace the need for oil and gas and coal. I don't think I can overstate what could happen to try to stop a small group like ours from coming forward. And this is why the World Puja network and the other networks that we're on need to understand that everyone's going to have to step up to the plate on something like this. Or if we acquire the Stan Meyer equipment and it gets operative, if it becomes operational, it'd be the same situation, because then you would have the means to take the wastewater from your showers of every home and run your cars and your house on a generator system that would put out nothing but water vapor as pollution, and the energy would literally be free. So anything that would make this kind of fundamental change is going to get the attention of some folks who aren't exactly friendly to the idea, if you get my drift. And so, this is a very, very complex and involved issue. And I think that we're going to need not only the moral support and the prayers and the hopes of many people, but we're going to need their financial support, and we're going to need their networking support. And we need it now. I think we need to begin to get that in place right now. And this is why I'm asking everyone to go to the orionproject.org and see what we're doing, make a contribution, and then forward that email, that website address to all of your friends and everyone in your address book.
It's worthwhile pointing out here at this point, as I think both you and I have spoken about in the past on the World Puja Network, is that even if we had something like this in a demonstration model, robust demonstrator, working tomorrow, it would take a period of time, months literally, to reproduce it and to come up with a set of reproducible technologies, and then to go from that stage to something that would be commercially viable, go through underwriter testing and all the other testing, and the commercialization step is non-trivial, and that can take, in some cases, 1 to 2 years. So, and then at that point, you're actually starting to build these devices and making them available to the public in certain sectors and what have you. So, it's going to take a while. The good news, it's going to take years, years to actually start to have an impact at the more than just a couple % level, which is what our country and the planet in general needs. So there will be a period of time where people will be aware of technologies, but they can't get them. But just being aware of them will produce a sense of, oh my gosh, there is some hope. I've said this before, there is some hope available, and there are some alternatives to the standard fare.
Well, that's what we want. We want a robust system that will prove the science. And what the Orion Project's involvement of this is really initially at the early stages to be able to help this scientific group get these completed. We're already providing some grant funding to them of around, around $25,000. And we are very much interested in then seeing if it can be reproduced and understood by other people. And people say, well, of course it could be, but these facts not in evidence. It's actually many times engineers will come up with something, and they may not have a very good ability at putting the three-dimensional device on a two-dimensional piece of paper or set of plans that could then be scientifically reproduced by other people. And the sine qua non of science is independent reproducibility. So the Orion Project is the entity that will initially be doing this evaluation, testing, and reproducing the technology and seeing that it is, in fact, a reproducible, robust, scientifically proven system. At that point, the whole system gets lit up very, very, very large. But I think that what we want people to understand is that now is when we need the support. Once you bring out to the public at the National Press Club and on all the world's media that such a thing has been proven and reproduced and tested at major universities and whatnot, there'll be enormous. But if this is the stage where we really need to have people saying, I'm going to be a pioneer in new energy and I'm going to get involved with the Orion Project now to help support this kind of fundamental grant making and research that we're doing, and also to give us the ability to act very swiftly and with a very strong team of people if this group up in this other country are successful, as we're certainly hopeful that they are. We wouldn't be pursuing it unless we felt there was a good chance, if not a very high chance, that they will succeed here in the next few weeks. So we want people to understand that the implications of this in terms of transforming our civilization are just enormous. I mean, imagine being able to have these sort of systems scaled up to the megawatt level or half a megawatt, where your cities and communities and universities and businesses and industries are running on clean, non-polluting, free energy from the quantum vacuum, from the energy around us, and that this electromagnetic field that is around us in space is enormous. And if they have succeeded in doing this, and we understand that they've succeeded in doing it a couple times in the past, then what we want to be able to do is support it and put an umbrella of protection and support around this and move it very quickly out to the public. This is not something, the reason we're very public about what we're doing is that I recognize, as I did with disclosureproject.org, that we had to have millions of people aware of what we were doing who were prepared to stand up with us in order to provide the strategic security we need. And by strategic security, I mean this. The usual instruments of seizing and suppressing these sort of breakthroughs simply can't happen if millions of people know about it. And that's why those of you listening to this interview on the World Puja Network, are our first line of support and also protection, because I do not believe that if the public, even Joe Sixpack with his F-150 pickup truck in the gun rack, who's now paying $100 or more to fill it up in gasoline, if they find out that some group is trying to put the kibosh on this kind of scientific breakthrough, I don't think the public would stand for it. And I think that's why my strategy has always been let the public in the tent under this umbrella, but more than that, the vanguard of support and protection. And that's why we can all come together and support this at the orionproject.org, and it will have an enormous effect, not only from your contributions, but also the strategic support, the protection, the networking support, and that we need that very much from everyone who's listening.
Absolutely. And things are moving. This is a very exciting time with the Orion Project. We began this about 8 months ago, 10 months ago.
Oh, no, 6 months.
Well, the Orion Project itself.
The Orion Project was formed in March, and this is October, so it's just been a little over 6 months now.
You're correct.
Yep.
You're absolutely correct.
We've done a lot, and we've achieved a lot, and with the support of people listening to the World Puja Network and others out there, and I hope everyone listening will network this to everyone they know, because I'm hoping that the next time we're on the show to talk about these energy breakthroughs, we'll have some more exciting news about this development and also the work we're doing in trying to protect and secure and develop the Stan Meyer technology.
Yes, and we thank everybody out there who listens to this, and we thank them for their interest in what we're doing and their support for this would be impossible alone. And believe me, because we've been working at it alone for a number of years, and we really need the help and support that Dr. Greer is speaking of to make this all happen for all of us.
That's right. We sure do. Well, look, as I think our hour is about up, I would like to thank you, Ted, for joining me today.
You're welcome.
And I'd like to thank the World Puja Network for hosting us, and for all of you for your contributions and your support and prayers and thoughts and meditations to help us move this forward. I'm confident that we are discovering the means for establishing an enlightened and sustainable civilization on this planet, and that is within reach. And if we all pull together, we'll make it a reality. Thank you all very much, and look forward to speaking with you again next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.